Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't even know what I just did. And I don't know. Okay. Hi.
But here,
And there's like a million people on these things now.
Exactly. Everything is super maxed out, including all of us. So, including
all
of us.
We're talking about.
Sorry. I don't know how he got in here. You have to go.
Okay, super. Everybody feel ready to start?
Yep. Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Hello, welcome to House Calls. This is a web series from the University of Michigan Institute for the Humanities Gallery, where for the past 7 weeks, we've been checking in with artists around the state to see how everybody's doing and what they're making and thinking about in this time of COVID-19.
Today, we are honored to be visiting with Ricky Weaver from Ypsilanti. Before we get into the conversation, I'd like to introduce everyone. I'm Angela Abiodun, the Collaboration and Outreach Manager at the Institute for the Humanities. We also have Amanda Krugliak, who is the Arts Curator at the Institute for the Humanities. And we have Juliet Hinely, who is the Arts Production Coordinator at the Gallery.
Hey, thanks so much, Ricky.
Ricky Weaver is an image-based artist using her name, camera, and the images that come as a way to explore concepts of legacy and what we leave behind. An alum of Eastern Michigan University and Cranbrook Academy of Art, she is now also an adjunct professor at Wayne State. Driven by an understanding that images form our reality and self-portraiture provides a unique reflective space about questions around performativity, she offers us a wealth of vibrant photographs interrogating motherhood, Black girlhood, grief, and the terrain of assimilation. I love the language you use to talk about your work, among other concepts. So again, thank you so much, Ricky, for joining us today.
Thank you guys for having me.
Definitely. It's just to get us started, to get us feel of the room. How are you? How are you doing?
It changes every day. Today I feel really good. So just thinking about what are the things that gives me these feelings, these types of conversations. Some days have been really hard. So I'm kind of trying to balance between grief and gratitude. I don't know, grief and gratitude are two things that I feel are all kind of undulating. So I like that when you talked about my work, you used the word grief because that is something that I think about a lot. So I'm sitting with that, capacity, stretching your capacity is the way that I think about grief. So I guess, I don't know, that's how I feel. That's where I'm at. Today's a good day. The sun keeps peeking out. So yeah.
I love that you positioned grief and gratitude, because I think in my heaviest moments, I'm always grasping for something to help me stay afloat. And gratitude is definitely that. I would wonder, have you found your gratitude practices shifting as time goes on?
That's a really good question. I think it feels more focused, more clear on the things that I want to feel gratitude towards. Being in the house with the kids and this, oh my God, you guys are driving me crazy. I need to leave, but also there was this moment, maybe in the first 2 or 3 weeks where I noticed that I didn't look at them as individuals lately. It was just the kids, got to get the kids to school, got to put the kids here, there. And so that was a moment where I was like, oh, I'm relearning them as individuals, which I probably wouldn't have had the chance to do with like school, work, just like this really unsustainable way of life that was happening. So that's something I'm like grateful for like every day. I'm just like, the way we were living was not sustainable at all. And I felt like I was like about to give up. Like I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like every day felt like that. It was just like, I can't show up for my friends at their art events because like I can't even show up for myself. I can't, you know, I'm like, I'm halfway showing up at work at this point, halfway getting the kids' homework done, you know, the things that seem so important. So yeah, I would say that gratitude is definitely shifting. It's been my practice and the things that I've been thinking about that's helped me to like stay with that, and the thing to like thinking about things to be helpful for.
And then like you went through a transition of being an adjunct professor in class, in person, with however many students you saw, however many days a week, to like shifting your whole concept online. And I don't know if you were teaching photography, but like I assume that had to be a difficulty regardless of the medium that you were teaching.
It was really difficult. It was just like, oh, like, let's just stop. Let's just take a break. And we did take about we had an extra week for spring break happened. Then it was like, hey, take another week, get your syllabi together and do what you can. So, I mean, I try to find like thanks in all things. I'm always quoting scriptures, but yeah, I do try to find thanks in all things. And one of the things I was really grateful for is the level of intimacy that happened with my students when we had to have these like one-on-one conversations, and they all committed and showed up, and that made me feel like really positive, because a lot of people were having problems getting their students to show up, but I didn't have any expectations. It was just like I was able to just show up as me, you know, like, hey, my kids are in the background. It's like there's nothing I can really do about that right now. I look a mess, I feel a mess, and that's okay. And it's okay for you to feel that way too. Like, let's do what we can do, because that's all we can do. And so I feel like, we were able to connect and like solve issues and problems, because ultimately educators, I feel like that's what we're here for, to be mentors and also educators. It's like hand in hand. I think like that's what I do.
Ricky, I wonder, can you show us some of your work? I'd love to see what you're doing right now.
Okay. This isn't a thing that I've made, but it's a thing that I'm carrying around and feeling. And I'll just start with like showing you guys with this. So, and it's such a little thing, right? And you're going to see my messy bed on the other side of the room. But so this is like this black round piece of plexiglass that, and I'll send you guys some of the images that I've taken, because they're digital. But I've been just carrying this around. This is a material that I've been working with since, like, I used black plexiglass in like my thesis piece a couple years ago, and I've just been just really trying to get a feel for this material and what it is exactly I'm doing. I know a lot of the things I was thinking about with this magic, surveillance, or surveillance. So at the time I was reading Dark Matters by Simone Brown, and looking at like Steve Mann and like anti-surveillance, but thinking about spirituality or like, you know, the ideas of magic as like a surveillance practice. So portal. This is like this little portal I've been carrying around. So I'll just take it outside and like position it somewhere and just take images, or take a self-portrait in it. Or I'll like hang out with these like on my porch and just like look into them and look around them and just like take pictures on my phone. Okay, so this piece was a misprint from a work that exists as a diptych with an image. And this one says space without works is dead. But I've been just carrying this around. I've been taking it on my patio with like my plants and setting it on this box, like using it as a surface, like setting my candles, incense, stones, crystals, whatever, whatever's coming outside to hang out with me. I've been sitting it here, and it's activated the work in a way that I hadn't really necessarily been thinking about. I think I was telling you guys about the piece I made for my solo exhibition after this, called Shall Not Perish But Have Everlasting Life, which was a 7 by 2 foot kind of like grave plot with soil around it. I guess thinking about these portals in relationship to all the death that's happening, and what's on the other side of those, I think, or what can be on the other side of those, and what are we what am I building in like every moment with every like gesture and these like micro things that we do on a daily, like what are we setting up, on the other side of these portals?
Yeah.
I think also when you see your reflection in the work as a viewer, not only is it immersive, but there's also a certain complicity too that suggested, what is our role? It's not as somebody, a remote, it's very much as part of what's ever happening or has happened. So that's very, very interesting too, as a layer that this brings up, that reflective surface.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It also makes me think of like reaching through, because of it, like there's something about the quality of the plexiglass, and it makes me think about like literally reaching through, and how there's also this conversation spiritually about how you're not supposed to like touch the dead, but there's like a desire to touch, there's a desire to engage, and there's a desire to like get closer. And it makes me think about like, with that desire to like engage, what do I pull away from it? Like when I pull my hand back, what comes with me? And and to your point about like grief, how can we then use that grief and that pulling back as a way to move forward and find something on the other side of like that experience in that moment, to open up ourselves?
Both of those things that Amanda and Angela, both of the things you mentioned, I feel like work together. I'm going to try to like, so with Amanda, you were talking about the seeing your reflection, and me thinking about archive and language building and curating archive and collapsing archive. It is very important that the viewer feels implicated and becomes a part. Like that's an image. Once you see your reflection, it's an image, it's real, and it is part of the archive. So you are, you are in some way like a part of this. And then thinking about what we pull back. So a lot of this work, the work started with a photograph of my grandmother, but then she passed in the process of like making this work. And so that longing for that communion with her like was there. And my relationship to death did change in like a very particular way. And so orientation is something that I've been thinking about, or the idea that like we're disoriented, and how can we build be world building if we don't know where we are. So that is the thing I feel like for me that I'm reaching for, like where, like what, tell me something, some information about myself that's going to help me feel like I know where I'm at, and I know who I am in all of this. I don't know.
Yeah, well, like thinking about it, no, it really does. Like this notion of world building, and like, okay, the reality that previously was defined for me has completely fallen away. So here we are in this place to like rebuild in some ways, or redefine, whether it's like towards the future or just to like get through the day, to like kind of set out some markers of like, okay, this is who I am today and this is where I am. Like thinking about that, what are you prioritizing in your daily world building, and what's your world building work right now for you?
I feel like I'm always talking about this quote, and eventually maybe I won't, but it really drives my practice and my life and my the idea of world building. So in the book Black Skin, White Mask, Frantz Fanon says, a man who owns a language as an indirect consequence owns the world expressed and implied by that language. And so love, like as a language, teaching my children how to build language. A lot of times I teach them through image, because that's a language that I feel like I have some type of, I have a hold on, like I understand it. But like gesture in my, in my work and in my everyday life is a language. So one of the things I imagine thinking about, like my mom and my aunties and my grandmas, like being at like a family, we always gathered, we always communed. So like being at something and the things they would do, just seeing them, like I don't hear what they're saying, but seeing them and how that resonates with my body, with my spirit, and knowing that that's a language, and imagining that language, that the indirect consequence of that language is a world that doesn't require escape. Like it already exists, it was already there. So I guess like with my phone, like proliferating like images, like if archive builds image, make more archive, like like document these things. So
I've thought so much lately about what are the stories of this time and who's going to tell them. And, you bring up not only the telling of stories, but that language of how they're told. What is that perspective? And language is so integral to identity and who we are, and often regulated or taken away from people to tell their stories, right? So especially right now, it feels like that is so critical. What are the stories? Who's going to tell them as an archive?
Yeah, and I think about that a lot, and I keep thinking about also like, when do the stories need to be told? Where should they be stored? So like thinking about the body as this like central place for downloading, exporting, like archives, like the body, and understanding how like I think that things come to us when they need to come, like when they need to. And so like spirituality in relationship to surveillance, I feel like goes hand in hand with language. Like we are so heavily surveilled that, like everything doesn't need to be known, So
When you think of, so that takes me into a whole nother question, because I've been interested in the archive for a while. And I was introduced to it in my critique of it from an academic standpoint. But this is the same conversation of like, what's archived? How is it archived? What slant is given to the archive? How do we understand the power that comes from that? And when we talk about the idea of surveillance in relationship to the fact that we're moving to a mostly digital archive, where a lot of what we're putting up it could be used for whatever purpose after it's posted online. How are you thinking about what you share and what you keep for yourself? And I think that keeping for self can be talked about on various levels, but it could be because I'm keeping it because it feeds me, or I'm keeping it because of whatever. But like, how are you determining the difference?
That's a really like that. I'm always like circling around that and working through that. I think a lot about the relationship between the titles of my work, the image that you see of yourself in the plexiglass, the text that's accompanied, and the actual image. And knowing that like the space between all of those things, like if we can meet there, like that's the thing that I want to be archived. And code, making work that's coded in various ways. You can't have a lot of control over it, but it's, I think, my way of saying like, okay, this is what I'm willing to give, and this is what I'm willing to keep. And, I think like thinking about these thresholds to the work.
Yeah.
I wonder too, it makes me think of Gillian Walker, the playwright. She was here, I think, a year ago. And this idea that there's some imperative, like to contradict myself, that there's some outside imperative for people to share all their stories, right? And that's sort of handing over something. So I do think like that also comes into the equation, that there isn't or shouldn't be this imperative, which is an outside voice, to just offer up what is most precious, what is most, what one holds closely, that should be a decision, right? Rather than coming from some other feel good place of tell us your stories. It's a different equation.
Yeah. And that's, I feel like, especially with self-portraiture, that's it's always a internal conversation that I feel like we're constantly having. But performance also, I think, allows for a layer of measuring what you want to, how much you want to give. So like if you notice in my work, I always have on the same robe and the same headscarf. And so that is me going to another place to be able to share, or another iteration of me that is sharing a specific thing. But I won't do that. Like I won't wear that here, or I won't, the context is different. So,
that's to me, very, very much tied to this performance aspect of your work, what you choose to reveal, what you hold back, that decision that you make, even in risky material like this, you're deciding, you have the control of how much and when and how. I wonder, Ricky, I get so caught up in this conversation, I wish I could have it all day. But I'm thinking now, as we've explored these different areas, when you think about what art does and its function and what it can do, and we're in this time where every week is different, and it's a time of conflict and upheaval and limbo, what can artists do, or what role can art play in this time?
I've always thought this way and kind of taught my students in this way. Like one of the first works that we need to do is contextualize ourselves, how we exist in this space, what are our capacities, what are we capable of, and then be very mindful of what we're making. My daughter and my students are like, you're just so critical of everything. But I think that understanding the material as a part of like language building and world building, whatever material you're using, whatever signifiers you're using, understand how they exist historically, like, how do they exist contemporarily, and really like be responsible for what you're making. And I think Archive, Alexis Gums, like really drove this home for me, but like really understanding how like everything is everything on like such a quantum level, and really just living by that, like knowing that me doing this motion and moving these particles just shifted something else somewhere else in another plot in space-time. So like really understanding how like small we are, but how big we are when we're moving together, and how much we can do. Because sometimes it does feel like really like, what can I do? I'm just this one person. But like knowing that we are all doing these works all over the place, and that will culminate in something, I guess that's just how I'm living. Like knowing my capacity, doing what I can do, and knowing, and I think that's the role of artists.
The connective threads that I hear, that I've heard through everything you've talked about, is like world building. And we can talk about it through various lenses. I feel like your lens is really like Afrofuturist, but like I'm very much a believer of, we can't talk about the new world that we want unless we critique and are honest about the world we're in. And I've been hearing that in what you're saying, and that requires the space for critique, that requires the space for speculation, that requires the space for conflict, and like the ways in which we can like acknowledge that we may have an understanding of a type of world that we want, but we don't all necessarily have the same understanding for the means to get there. And so like I think this is a moment where everyone has the capacity to allow their feet to be in those two worlds more so than before. How people can choose to show up in this moment. They can either be like, I'm fine with the world, I want to go back to the world, or they can allow themselves to acknowledge that this world has never been sufficient for all of us. What can that new world be while I'm still like grounded in my body and my sensibilities? That long preamble to ask. What is keeping you grounded? And I see grounded similar to being hopeful and motivated, but like, what's keeping you?
Like grounded as like in my body, 70s R&B, like thinking about just again like connecting to that space and language of gesture, and remembering like my mom and aunts dancing, and having that with my kids, and like Motown, like listening to those things. Like I was listening to Zoom by the Commodores the other day, and I was just like, this is really Afrofuture, like, because I do consider myself like between like futurist and pessimist, like Afrofuture, Afro-pessimist lens. And so like finding like these signifiers and like things that have like that already exist, that are pointing to this world, that we're hopeful for, like those things feel like really really grounding. And it's just like thinking about like my ancestors or something, like we've survived whatever coronavirus, we can do that, like what so like thinking about that has been like really grounding. And I feel so simple, but it's just like, just dance, just be present, like just braid my kids' hair and put beads on it, like it just tickle parties with my kids, just because what else can I do but be present. So just thinking about, Angela, what you were saying, the hard part, the question, and I think we all are grappling with this in some way. It's just like, what are you willing to sacrifice to get that other foot, like to get that other foot to the other side? That's a hard question. It's hard. And so, so it's also a grounding question, though.
It is.
Like, so those spaces are keeping me tethered to my body in a way that I think is really important.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ricky.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work. Thank you for your reflections. Thank you for your time. You offered us so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming over. This was, I needed this so much. It feels so good and giving me the energy I need, you know. So,
us too.
Appreciate that.
Likewise.
I woke up excited.
Yeah.
Me too. I've been excited / like nervous, but it's been really comfortable. So I appreciate that.
Definitely. All right. Well, we'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hope to see you in real life. Yeah. Okay. Take care.
Yes. Bye. Cultivate.
We'll connect in Ipsy. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Take care.
Have a good day.
Bye.